Questions?
What are the origins of thoughts? Where do they come from?
Thoughts are part of our experience. If you think about it, everything we experience is thought-like. It could be said that we experience only thoughts. Because it's only after the perception that we come with an afterthought that qualifies the previous perception either as a bodily sensation, as an external perception, or as a thought. Right? But think about it. During the night dream, you have perceptions, right? But as you wake up, it turns out that these perceptions, sensations, etc., they were in fact thoughts, right? So our human experience is comprised of thoughts. We could call those thoughts mentations to expand the scope a little bit so that we can include bodily sensations, but they are all thought-like. They all belong to the so-called subtle realm, right? Now, a neuroscientist would tell you, well, we measure electrical or electrochemical changes in the brain that seem to be consistent with some forms of thoughts. And there seems to be on one correspondence or some kind of correspondence between our measurements or the observation we make through MRIs in the brain, of the brain, and the thoughts. Yes. Nevertheless, we are talking about two different domains, right? One is a domain of physically observable phenomena, electrical currents, whatever, and the other domain is a subjective domain, the experience of thought. So, when you ask me what is the nature of thought, I have to make a distinction with what is the thought for the neuroscientist and what is the thought for us as a subjective experience, right? Because these are two different domains. So let's talk about the thought as a subjective experience, and more generally mentations as a subjective experience. Where do they appear? Where do they exist? And into what do they disappear? Or where do they subside, if you will? In consciousness, obviously, right? So, if you take the analogy of a golden ring, you cannot have the golden ring without the gold. However, you can have the gold without the golden ring. It suffices to melt the ring, you still have the gold. So What is the true nature of the golden ring? It's the gold. Why? Because you can have the gold without the ring, but you cannot have the golden ring without the gold. Using this analogy, look at thought and consciousness. You cannot have a thought without consciousness. But you can have consciousness without any specific thought. Therefore, the true nature of thought or mentation is consciousness. So, what is it in final analysis that we perceive at all times? Consciousness and only consciousness. We believe to perceive something else than consciousness, but as we look closely into the true nature of our experience, we experience consciousness and only consciousness at every moment. So what's the nature? The origin, the place of existence, the destination of thoughts. Where do they live? Where do they move? Where do they have their being? In consciousness. Now, the electrical current, etc., their connection with thought is a little, if I can take an analogy, similar to the connection there is between a map of California and California. Of course, there is a correspondence between the map of California and California. But California as an experience is different from the map of California. In spite of this correspondence and consistency, in the consistency there is in this correspondence. What is the reality of California, its substance? The reality of the universe, right? So what we have access to through external measurement of thought is some kind of a map. It's not the real thing, because the real thing is experienced directly, like California. What is the true nature of the real thing? What is its reality? Consciousness. And I have to be very clear that at all times when I use consciousness, I use it with the meaning that consciousness is a reality that perceives. It is a reality that is hearing these words in this moment, whatever this reality is. That's the definition. It's not mind, it's very different. It certainly is the reality of mind. My definition of mind is the phenomenal aspect of our human experience. Our human experience, everything we have experienced since we can remember. Our human experience is made of thoughts, external sense perceptions, bodily sensations. That's the objective part. Plus consciousness, the subjective part. In India, they have different classifications. They say objective part, namarupa. subjective part, Satchitananda. Namarupa, Satchitananda. But in a more Western classification, it depends how you cut the carrot, right? Whether if you cut it longitudinally, transversely, here, phenomenally, objectively, thoughts, bodily sensations, external sense perceptions. But an argument could be made that whenever we have a thought, it's always in terms of the senses. You see what I mean? Either we see it, or some kind we hear it, and sometimes we smell it or we touch it. But we think in terms of bodily sensations and external sense perceptions. And another argument could be made that somehow what we call external sense perception and internal perception are not that different. So these are classification that, you see, we make this distinction between internal and external perception only because we believe to be this limited body. So then we perceive inside and outside. But the reality is that this body, our real body, is the universe. So that in fact, we only have internal perceptions. You see? We only have internal perceptions because this entire body is our universe. You see, so as our sense organs sense both ways, through the skin, they perceive the outside, and somehow some part of the skin have become extremely specialized, like the, what do you call it, the tympanon. It's some kind of a skin, right? So the eyes, the retina, has become also very specialized to perceive different. And the tongue or the nose, these are also, how do you call that? A kind of epithelial cells, whatever. Anyway, they are cells on the surface, right? Because you perceive through the surface. And so that's towards the outside. But inside, our nerves and nervous system perceive the organs inside the body. So in fact, all the perceptions are internal if our body is the universe. These distinctions are purely man-made. They are only, in a sense, tied to our identification with the body. So they are internal or external with respect to the physical body, but not with respect to ourselves as consciousness. As consciousness, everything is internal.
To follow that train of thought, so to speak, the other day you mentioned our bodies as radar antenna, where we...
Our body
as radar antenna.
Radar antenna, yeah.
Where we use our senses to pick up direction and amplitude.
Yes, especially the eye, the eyes, and the brain behind the eyes. And that's the antenna. We you know, it's like a radar. It can be scanning or it can be tracking, you know. And you have a telemetry with the two eyes, right? And you have the computer behind. What is missing is the missile system. From the vantage point of view of a former expert.
So I'm curious. So all these antennas that are in this room, that are spread through the universe, isn't it hypothetically possible to perceive from all of them?
Of course, there is only one perceiver.
But as of this moment, I seem to be restricted to this antenna.
Because you identify, yeah. Once I asked this, because the reason is that the antenna doesn't perceive. Just look at your body. You have two hands. And what you touch with the left hand, the right hand doesn't know. And the left hand doesn't know what you are touching with the... But you know. Because you are not the hands. You are beyond the hands, right? So it's the same thing. One mind, one antenna, one body mind, one antenna, doesn't know what the other antenna is perceiving. It's the same in our radar systems. You can have a series of air control radars in various locations, all interconnected. So ground control has access to, and the computer can plot all the planes, all the transponders on one single screen, but the information may come from various antennas. The same thing. Each antenna doesn't know the totality of the picture. Once I asked this question from my teacher, if it is true that your consciousness and my consciousness are the same, how is it that I am not aware of your thoughts? And he said, how do you know that you weren't and that you just conveniently forgot? Why are we so certain that the consciousness that was aware of our having lunch and the consciousness which is hearing these words right now is the same consciousness? Why are we so certain? Because we remember having this breakfast, having lunch. Let's assume we got delusional, right? Let's assume we have smoked a very, very big joint, or we have licked a very small stamp. The US Post Office is convenient. No, so you licked the small stamp, and then you are absolutely certain that you had your breakfast with your fellow, I don't know, crocodiles. Why not?
The one that was served the lawyer for lunch?
Yeah, you remember you had the lawyer for lunch. Exactly. And it was very hard to chew. So the point, is that our certainty that it was the same consciousness that was presiding over our lunch and which is now the witness of what's going on here, this certainty is very shaky, in fact. It's based upon memory. Memory is a recollection, is a thought that arises. It could be delusional, but it's no proof. On the other hand, we don't remember exactly all the events that took place a year ago on the same day of the year at the same time. Right? We don't have any recollection of that. Right. Does it mean that it was not the same consciousness that was aware of that? No, it was the same consciousness, right? We don't challenge that, although we don't remember. So, on the one hand, recollection is no proof that it was the same consciousness. And on the other hand, the fact that we don't remember is not proof that it wasn't the same consciousness. So, the way memory of human minds works, it spans across time. But it doesn't span across minds, you see? The fact that it doesn't span across minds doesn't mean that consciousness doesn't span across minds. Just as the fact that memory seems to span across time doesn't imply that consciousness spans across time. Often we seem to require elements of proof that in fact if we take a clause of proof or disproof that consciousness is universal, or that consciousness spans across mind, or that consciousness spans across time, we require elements of proof that before making this requirement, we better make sure that these required elements of proof have real probative value. You say probative value? Have real probative value, because they don't.
What value?
Probative value, you see? Because they don't, as I've shown to you. The same thing. Often, let me take another example. Often people tell me, well, I could be easily convinced that consciousness is universal if I had the experience of what is going on in your mind. Often I hear this argument. Well, I have news. Most human beings, at least once in their life, have had some experience of telepathy, some telepathic experience. Most human beings. In fact, all, but they don't remember, they fail to notice it. If it were true that a telepathic experience would be proof of the universality of consciousness, all human beings would be enlightened. However, many people have had telepathic experience, and their interpretation is very different. Their interpretation is, there is here a mind consciousness, there is there a mind consciousness, and for some mysterious reason, they communicated. So to require, to be convinced that consciousness is universal, to make the requirement that I would be able to read your mind and you would be able to read my mind, wouldn't work. You see? It wouldn't convince you. You could have this interpretation, okay, our minds are communicating, but they are still separate. The reason for that is this, is that no phenomenal experiment or no phenomenon can teach us anything about consciousness. That's something that we have to deeply understand. So to require, to claim a phenomenon that would finally bring an answer to the question, is consciousness universal or limited? It's not possible. Let's put it this way. Try to imagine a thought experiment, a phenomenal thought experiment. You see what I mean by thought experiment? What we mean in science is an experiment that can be designed theoretically, although the technology is not available to actually set up the required apparatus. So now, let's assume we have improved our technology and the sky is the limit. We can do anything, basically, in the phenomenal realm. We can connect, each of us has a little port here. We can connect the port and see on a screen what is in the mind. You know, we can do, the sky is the limit, right? So imagine the technology has reached such a level of sophistication, and try to design an experiment using this limitless technology that could bring a final answer to the question, is consciousness universal or not? And I leave that to you as homework. And tomorrow, if you have an answer, if you have an experiment, you have the floor and you describe it and we'll enjoy it.
Okay.